to live in Ghana, West Africa. I was there for 6 years doing poverty alleviation work. And I remember thinking I knew everything about poverty. I lived in communities without access to electricity or running water. And then I moved to San Francisco, and I was shocked at homelessness in my backyard. I saw people in the subways who needed medical attention desperately. I talked to friends about this problem, and they said, get used to it, as though homelessness is something that you can just get used to. And then my husband got a job in tech, and suddenly my lifestyle started to change. I could afford to take a Lyft rather than ride the bus. I started to go out to nicer dinners, and a sort of distance started to be created between me and people experiencing homelessness. I noticed my behaviors during that time. I'd be late for a meeting, and I'd rush past someone reaching out to me just for a bit of human connection. I often wouldn't respond, not even just because I was late, but because I was afraid. I was afraid to feel pain, to feel guilt. It wasn't just me. Looking at studies from Paul Piff at UC Berkeley, he found that higher social class predicts increased unethical behavior. That accumulation of wealth is actually creating a real empathy gap in this country. And so, determined not to become apathetic and not to fall into that trap, I started to educate myself. I learned all that I could. And there's a few key takeaways that I think everyone should know. One is that homelessness is a systemic problem. Back in the 80s, I'm not sure how many of you are familiar, I'm sure a lot of you are, our federal housing programs were cut from $32 billion in '81 to $6.9 billion in '89. That's in less than a decade. And it's a lot of why we have the state of homelessness that we have today. A lot of people who worked in homelessness at that time thought it was temporary, that it was a phenomenon that would just go away. But if you look at statistics like New York City's shelter system, in 1981, there were 15,000 people in shelter. Today, there are 60,000 people in New York City's shelter system. The second key piece we need to know about homelessness is that it is inextricably connected to racial inequality. If you look among the African American population as an example, 14% of the general population is Black. Meanwhile, 60% of the homeless population is Black. If we want to talk about changing homelessness, we have to start talking about racial inequality. And the third, for some good news, because I know I hit you with a lot, is that homelessness is not intractable. There are solutions within reach. If you look at Salt Lake City as an example, in the last decade, they've reduced homelessness by 90%. In New Orleans, they've virtually ended veteran homelessness by investing in housing as well. HUD thinks that about $20 billion would end homelessness in America as an annual investment. That's how much US households spend on Christmas decorations every year. Just saying. So these solutions are possible. And when I learned the facts, and when I realized that they were possible, I couldn't blame a homeless person anymore. I started to turn the mirror to myself to see where my actions were actually perpetuating these stereotypes and these problems. When I rushed past someone, ignored them, that was perpetuating the problem. But when I started to be more cognizant, I changed my behaviors. I started looking people in the eye and acknowledging their humanity. And just doing that, starting to engage, changed my perspective. and I wanted to give other people the opportunity to change their perspective too. I saw a role for technology to bridge that gap. And I remembered from my time in Africa seeing so much innovation in how we were addressing global poverty. My peers were launching companies that did solar innovation or mobile banking. I saw so much innovation, but then moved to San Francisco, the epicenter of technology in Silicon Valley, and I was shocked at how few startups were addressing domestic poverty. And that's when I joined my co-founder, Rose Broom, and together we launched HandUp. It's a website where you can give directly to specific individuals experiencing poverty in your community. You can go to our site and read stories of specific individuals and donate toward helping them reach a goal. Through our network of 60 nonprofits across the US, you can rest assured that your donation is going toward its intended use. To date, we've raised over $1.3 million to support 2,000 individuals across 25 cities. And we're just getting started. Thank you. We've helped people like Julianne, who living a normal life. She had a bachelor's degree, she had a job, she had everything going. She met her husband and they moved to San Francisco on a job offer, only to get there and realize that the offer had fallen through. At that time, Julianne was pregnant with her first child. She told me the story of sitting in a shelter with her husband the first night and just holding each other and wondering how they had fallen through, how there was no safety net to catch them. One wrong step, and that's where they ended up. Fortunately, Julianne is a very persistent person and a very strong woman, and she was able to work her way and get into permanent housing. But they still didn't have money for food stamps. They were waiting for their benefits to come in. It was taking a long time, as we can all empathize. They were out of money to buy baby food. Her case manager told her about HandUp, and within a couple days, people from the public donated, and she was able to not have her baby go hungry. Stories like Julianne's are so common. These are the hard, true stories of so many Americans. When you hear a story like that, you can't blame Julianne. We have to recognize that this is a systemic problem. We have to start making that shift. We also know now that this is a problem rooted from back in the 80s. This is a problem that's rooted from systemic racism, and it's also a solvable problem. It's going to take a lot more than technology to get there. It's going to take all of us showing up. 90% of new wealth in this country is going toward 1% of the population. And while we can't agree on how to allocate wealth at the top, I think we should all agree that homelessness, as the result for the bottom 1% of the population, is not acceptable. And if we want to get there, we have to start by looking at ourselves. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable sometimes. We have to be willing to talk about race and privilege and be willing to feel something. It's okay to feel guilt, to feel anger, to feel sadness. It's what makes us human. And when you start to feel something, suddenly you're motivated to take action. Look in your own community. Look what you can do. There's so much opportunity to get involved. Whether you believe in long-term focus and invest in housing, or you get involved with policy change and civic innovation, or give on HandUp and support someone's immediate needs. We all have a role that we can play, and it has to start with each of us. Homelessness is our responsibility. Let's all reclaim our empathy and our collective humanity. Thank you.